Salvete discipoli, welcome to your video about gerunds. Last class we left off with infinitives, which is the first type of verbal noun that we've reviewed this semester. We're going to go on with gerunds right now. Gerunds can get a little bit intense because some of you struggle with gerunds in English, let alone trying to learn them in Latin. The idea here is that if you learn them in English and also learn them in Latin, that you're going to be better at them in both languages. So I'm going to start off with English gerunds. In English, you already know this. The gerund is a verbal noun that ends in ing. But the trouble is that participles in English, at least the present participle in English, also ends with ing. And that can leave us feeling a little bit uncertain. Maybe it's possible that we are not sure whether it's a gerund or participle. The thing to do is to develop a test. Now, just like I like to test you to see if you know whether it's a gerund or a participle, you can actually test the ing word to find out if it's a gerund or a participle. Oh, there's my little joke. Get it? Verbally abusing, because they're verbals. Ha 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 ha. I picked 2004 because that was the year I started teaching. Oh, Fry's still not sure. We're going to help him out. So if you're stumped, let's make up a test. And just like everything I do, I put it in a chart. So I've got two awkward sentences that contain ing words. The first one says, a sleeping student drooled once on my desk. Ew. The second one says, do not attempt to impress your prospective homecoming date with your drooling. Okay, so if we are looking at a participle, you could sub in an adjective that's not an ing word, and the sentence will still make sense. If we're looking at a gerund, you could sub in a noun that's not an ing word, and the sentence should still make sense, at least grammatically. So let's give that a shot. A rude student drooled on my desk once. Ew. Do not attempt to impress your prospective homecoming date with your rude. Well, it's clear one of those sentences made more sense than the other. You can see the top sentence definitely made more sense. So the adjective substitution made better sense on sleeping, so it's probably going to be that sleeping is an adjective, therefore a participle. But let's try the test with the noun as well. We'll use the noun spittle. A spittle student once drooled on my desk. Ew. Do not attempt to impress your prospective homecoming date with your spittle. Again, clearly, that first sentence didn't make very much sense. What's a spittle student? The second sentence did make sense. With your spittle is a reasonable phrase. So the result then is that sleeping is an adjective, therefore it's also a participle. But drooling, the way we used it, was a noun, and therefore it's a gerund. All right, I hope that makes you feel a little bit better about gerunds in English. Let's talk about gerunds in Latin. You might want to pause this. It's going to get intense. All right, did you make yourself a spot of tea? Maybe you got a soda. Are you ready to go? All right, using a gerund is easy. See, I just used one. Recognizing them in somebody else's sentence is hard. Do you see? Using as a gerund and recognizing as a gerund. Huzzah! How many points do I receive? The fun has been doubled. Oh, for those of you that don't know, my niece Anna is helping me make this video. Was I talking crazy talk? Yeah, show them what crazy talk looks like. Say, that's crazy talk.
That's crazy.
That's crazy talk. All right, anyways, your English concept of the gerund actually encompasses a whole bunch of things in Latin because Latin has more kinds of verbals than English. So your English gerund encompasses Latin gerunds, Latin infinitives, gerundives, and supines. I've got a graphic to show you how those interact. Oh, I forgot my last bullet. It says, sorry. There's nothing I can do to make there be fewer verbals in Latin. We've just got to do it. All right, here's a graphic. I've got a bunch of different kinds of verbals in Latin on the left side of the screen. And over here on the right side of the screen, I've got some English verbal nouns. And if I've done my animation right, it's going to show you the relationships between them. So Latin infinitives sometimes get translated as English gerunds. So sometimes you're going to look at something that's an infinitive in Latin and you're going to change it into an ing noun in English. But most often, a Latin infinitive translates into an English infinitive. The Latin gerund most often translates to the English gerund. But sometimes you're going to translate the Latin gerund as if it were an English infinitive. Okay, the gerundive, which I'll teach you about later. Most often your gerundive becomes an English gerund. But sometimes your gerundive becomes an English infinitive. It could happen. The supine, even though you've never even heard of a supine in your life, unless you were paying attention last year and actually put it to memory, the supine in Latin is almost always an English infinitive. Still clear as mud, right? That's why we're going to go through and do them each in more detail. But this graphic should help you track down what's going on in the relationship between Latin verbals and English verbals and which direction you can translate them. They're not always a one-to-one correspondence, especially since the supine doesn't even exist in English. How could you have a one-to-one correspondence to something that doesn't exist in the second language? Oh, if you were paying attention in the participles video, I taught you a gerundive was the same thing as a future passive participle, and therefore it was an adjective. And that's still true. I didn't lie to you. But there is no gerundive in English, and it gets translated into a verbal noun in English. We'll get to it, I promise. Okay, so here's the really sticky thing. We're not sure in Latin sometimes whether we should translate the Latin into an English gerund or an English infinitive. The truth is that both forms get used. Here's another chart. I'm going to decline for you the Latin gerund, and since it's a noun, you actually do need a declension chart. Oh, P.S., it's always neuter, and it's only singular. So I don't have a singular or a plural column for you. The column where it says correct form is where all of your forms are going to go. I'll give you a rule for which form to use and when, and an example. Let's get started. All right, you actually use the Latin present active infinitive because there is no nominative gerund. So if you need a nominative gerund or you need a gerund, an ing English word, to be the subject of your Latin sentence, use the present active infinitive instead. There is a gerund for the genitive. There's its form. There is a gerund for the dative. There's its form. Okay, the accusative is kind of weird. If you want to use the gerund or the verbal noun as a direct object, you're actually going to use an infinitive and not a gerund at all. But if you want to put your verbal noun as the object of a preposition, then you need the gerund. So there is an accusative gerund, but you only use the accusative gerund as the object of a preposition, never as the direct object. And then there's an ablative gerund for you. It looks exactly like the dative, like it should, because it's second declension. All right, here's an example. Ruling a people is difficult, or it is difficult to rule a people. Do you see how regere could be translated either ruling or to rule? Just like back in my graphic with the different colored circles. In the genitive, however, adductus cupidine regendi, influenced by the desire of ruling. You can see that it's genitive because of the English preposition of. But here again, you can translate it as an infinitive, the desire to rule. All right, I actually struggled to write you an example using that same gerund to be dative. Animus bene regendo, the spirit for ruling well. Do you have the spirit for ruling? I think it works. I can say that gerunds and dative don't go together all that often. All right, here is to rule / ruling as the direct object of the sentence. The subject of the sentence is he. He does not like. What is it that he does not like? He doesn't like to rule, or he doesn't like ruling. So here, notice that we used regere, the infinitive. But in the sentence, he threw himself into ruling, you have a prepositional phrase. And if the gerund is going to be the object of a preposition and it needs to be accusative, we have the gerund form for that. So in English, that's always a gerund. But in Latin, it's a gerund if it's the object of a preposition, but it's an infinitive if it's the direct object. Lastly, I've got an example for you there in the ablative. I used an ablative of means by means of ruling. I bet that made sense without a whole lot of explanation from me. It's probably a good time to pause and screen cap. All right, did you pause and screen cap? Let's move on. I made you a less busy chart. This chart with my hashtag Winkeray, winning, gives you all the forms without any of the rules or the example sentences, just so you can have a chart to look at if you ever need to see the form. Again, you might want to pause and screen cap. All right, next time. I really wanted to teach this to you this time, but next time, Fry's not going to be sure if it's a gerund or a gerundive. Stay tuned, but when you come to my class next, you ought to be able to tell me whether a sentence requires a Latin gerund or a Latin infinitive when using the verbal noun. Y'all have a great Sunday evening, and I'll see you in class.